Hail and well met friends of Wurm and Ultima. If you love player housing, stay tuned, cause you're in for a treat. This is the 5th part in my series of videos which follows the progress of the Ultima Nostalgia project, the goal being to recreate the world of Ultima Online in a sandbox game called Wurm Unlimited. In the previous episodes, we were recreating various towns and locations of Britannia quite successfully. But how about player housing? Just how close could we get to mimicking the styles of the classic houses of Ultima Online? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to climb the steps of the large tower and check out the view from the roof, or walk along the long corridors and terraces of the castle? Well, you're soon going to find out. We'll also check a sample of customizable houses and have a look at how player housing differs between Ultima Online and Wurm. But before that, let's take a walk down memory lane as I share my history of player housing over the 13 years that I played Ultima Online. If you've never played UO, I think by the time we're done, you'll truly understand just how amazing UO was, why it holds such a special place in the hearts of so many veteran MMO players, and why so many UO players have flocked to Wurm to experience something similar. My player housing adventures all started back in 1999 when my best friend Elina begged me to join her in Ultima Online. To be honest, I had been wanting to play ever since UO came out in '97, but just had not had the possibility up till then. One of the first things we wanted to do, of course, is gather enough money to build our first house. Unlike Wurm, where you can start building a house pretty much anywhere, in UO there are only a limited amount of spots. Trees cannot be chopped down, nor can the land be terraformed, so finding a spot to build your house equals finding a clearing of grass on relatively flat ground. So once Elina and I had purchased our deeds, we set out sailing the world to find a place to build a home. We searched far and wide without any success until we finally ended up on an island called Oklo. It was there that we managed to find exactly 2 tiny spots, one for each, and immediately claimed those spots for ourselves. Oh, the joy and excitement of building that first house! At one point, a friend of ours who also lived on Oklo decided to quit the game and gave us all of his belongings and his little house close to the Oklo bank. We decided to use it to start a business we called Big Mama's Shop, which was fitting since we were both mothers with small babies at the time. Check out this cute website I made back then to promote it. Using JavaScript mouseovers, I was able to partially emulate how it would feel to go inside and interact with the vendors. Cool, huh? Even though it was made back in 1999, I haven't had the heart to take it down, so it's still up online just for nostalgia's sake. So if you're interested, you can go and test it out for yourself. I'll leave the link in the description below. The following year, word came out that Britannia would split into 2 identical facets, Trammel and Felucca. This meant a lot of fresh new land and the opportunity to build a larger house. So I set my mind on getting a castle. And why stop there? With the help of my older son, who was 8 at the time, we managed to place 2 castles on the 2 waterfront spots I was most hoping to get. One north of Trinsic and one north of Vesper. The fact that we succeeded in placing not only 1 but 2 castles was unprecedented, since there are only about 20 castle plots on the map per facet, and yet hundreds of players competing for those spots. We were more than ecstatic. To be fair though, I had spent several months doing recon work of all the castle plots beforehand and preparing meticulously for that day, so I felt it was well earned. At this point, Elina was not active in UO anymore, so I took over the shop business, shutting down the houses on Oklo and moving Big Mama's Shop to the Trinsic Castle to create a gigantic shopping mall. Each nook and cranny had a vendor selling wares, and the place became pretty popular and lucrative. My pride and joy of the castle was the public aquarium I created from pieces of dyed cloth, something a lot of players were doing at the time. Since Ultima Online allows you to stack items on top of one another, unlike Wurm, there was no end to the various decorations one could come up with a little imagination. So what did I do with the other castle? Well, I have to admit I felt a tinge of guilt for hogging up 2 of the 20 available castle spots, so I decided to do something useful for the community with the second one, and turned it into Big Mama's Apartamentos, a place where newbie players could come and live until they got on their feet enough to buy their own home. The apartment building was fully equipped with a kitchen, a games room, a sauna and swimming pool, where a lot of drunken parties took place, by the way, just check out all that beer, and a bar and lounge where tenants could come together after a long day and share an ale or two as they recounted stories of their adventures. The apartments themselves were made up of the corner rooms of the castle. Each applicant was interviewed before they were accepted as a tenant, and the place became so popular that there was an actual waiting list to get in. We even had some councillors and SCs come to visit one time, which was a huge honour, of course. I have very fond memories of those times and made many good friends like Gikopro, who spent her newbie days under the wing of the castle, but before long found her own place to live. It was always bittersweet, those moments when tenants were ready to leave the nest. It was around this time that I started to really understand how rewarding it can be to create things for the community, and I was getting tired by now of keeping Big Mama's shop fully stocked all the time. So I decided to turn the Trinsic Castle into a nightclub instead, naming it Big Mama's Nightclub, of course. The plan was to keep the doors locked during the week, then open them up every Saturday night. I hired a full staff of bouncers, waiters, bartenders, and DJs, and I myself would be the lady behind the counter selling tickets to get in. By the time I'd finished decorating, the castle was decked out with an amazing dance floor, bars both downstairs and upstairs, a pool table, a movie theatre, a buffet if you were feeling peckish, and of course a women's and men's bathroom. In Ultima Online, you can actually write in the books, so I even set up a little dirty magazine for the boys in their own bathroom. Once the castle was fully decorated and furnished, it was time to start advertising. On opening night, people were lining up outside already half an hour before the doors opened, and before you know it, there were people lined up as far as the eye could see. Once the doors opened, it was utter chaos, and we were forced to boot out a few rude people trying to force their way in. But folks soon learned to wait their turn, as they didn't want to end up banned from the castle, thus missing out on the biggest event that the Europa Shard had seen in a long time. As people started to flow in, they explored each area, waiting anxiously for the bachelor auction to begin. Even Orangebeard was sold off. I think he might have been the community manager or something like that at the time. And from that night on, the nightclub was open every Saturday night. Each week we had a different DJ who would upload their playlist to our Big Mama's Nightclub radio station that was being run on an online radio service called Live 365. We would provide the URL well beforehand on our event announcements on Stratix, and everyone could tune in and hear the exact same music being played at the same time. Because what's a nightclub without music, right? We also had a different event each week, including karaoke night, stand-up comedy night, cross-dressing night, weddings, and many others. Sometimes things got a bit wild and out of hand, as could be expected of any drinking establishment, but usually by the end of the night, customers simmered down to a mellow drunken stupor, just sitting and mumbling quietly. It was around this time of night where love and romance would flourish, however, and you'd often see couples dancing in the dimmed lights, whilst everyone else was slumped over their tables. A few years later, an old friend, Karenina, didn't have time enough to play anymore, so she gave me her plot next to the little bridge near Destard. Around that time, Stratix opened a winter holiday decoration competition, so since this was my first customizable house, I decided to take part and managed to get second prize with my snowflake sauna. The nice thing about customizable houses in UO is that it's so easy to start over and build another design, so you can really let your imagination run wild experimenting with different designs. In Wurm, however, building a house is a long and tedious process, so you pretty much need to plan beforehand. Most Wurm players use a little program called Deed Planner, which is made by Warlander, one of the developers. I'll include the link in the description below. The good thing, though, is that you can freely modify or demolish your house and start over, but the overall process does take much more longer than rebuilding and customizing houses in UO. Some other designs I tried with this Destard plot was an art museum and a battle arena where I was hoping to organize championship duels for tamers who wanted to pit their dragons or nightmares against one another. It came fully equipped with a ticket booth section on the ground floor, stables on the second floor, and the arena itself on the third floor with layered seats for the audience. I never did get around to creating any events though, which is a real shame, as I'm sure it would have been quite epic. Meanwhile, back at the Vesper Castle, the small plot right in front of the castle had freed up, so I decided to claim it for myself and build a public Finnish sauna. The customizable house bug had bitten me hard by now, especially after all the fun I had had with the Desert plot. The sauna had a manual instructing how to use it, as well as a message board to work as a guest book for visitors to leave their comments. Inside was a dressing room and the steam room, and while you can't actually dive into the water in UO like you can in Wurm, it was still fun to take this screenshot, as cooling off in the sea or lake is an essential part of the Finnish sauna experience. It was always lovely to get wrapped up into fluffy white robes afterwards and relax outside with some ales. Fast forwarding a few years, and by this time I wasn't running any events or establishments anymore. Both castles had been closed off from the public for ages, but I kind of missed giving cool experiences to the community, so I decided to plonk down a few more plots on the southern sandy shores of Fire Isle and went to work building a Greek holiday resort. My dream was that guests could wine and dine in the Greek restaurant, perhaps play some backgammon on the terrace, then retire to one of the many rooms in the other buildings. Alas, like with the battle arena, my energy only lasted enough to build the houses themselves, but again I never quite got around to making it all happen. I bet it would have been amazing though. At some point I wanted to try life on Siege Perilous, as it was the closest thing I could get to experiencing the spills and thrills of life prior to the Renaissance expansion, which split the world into mirrored PvE and PvP sides. Thanks to the Greek village, I had become quite fond of Fire Isle and managed to find a lovely little sandy spot just west of the Dragon Pits. It had stables on the bottom floor, a living room and kitchen on the second floor, and the master bedroom on the top floor. The roof level had a secret terrace you could teleport to enjoy the view while taking a bath. Towards the end of my Ultima Online days, I had grown very weary of the castles by now, so I sold off the Trinsic Castle for a handsome sum, then demolished the Vesper Castle so I could create 2 plots and try to recreate a famous town in World of Warcraft. Can any of you WoW players out there guess which buildings these are? Does anyone recognize them? Leave your guesses in the comments below. What I have done in Ultima Online is just a small sampling of the many things you can do with player housing in UO. To be sure, there are many other players out there who have done much more amazing things than I, but I think we can all agree that the game offers fantastic possibilities, making the player housing solutions of other MMOs absolutely pale in comparison. In most other MMOs, the most you can do is buy a pre-designed and pre-built house located in set locations, and usually the only people who can ever enter your house are either friends or guildmates. But you could never organize any events like the ones we just looked at. The only fully functional MMO I can think of that even comes close to Ultima Online in this respect is Wurm. There are some differences though, so let's see how the two games compare. The most obvious difference is that UO is a 2D game with an isometric perspective and fixed viewing angle, whereas Wurm is a 3D game using a first-person camera view. This certainly affects the experience, as UO feels more like playing God and building your tiny house like you would in The Sims, whereas in Wurm you get the immersive experience of being inside of your buildings and enjoying the view from the windows and balconies. After camera angle, the next most obvious difference is that in UO you are reserving a bit of land by building tiled foundation over it. While originally designed to be the foundation for one house, many like to build several tiny houses to give the illusion of a village. Whereas in Wurm you are truly claiming an area of land onto which you can build many houses, have fenced areas with livestock, grow crops, forests, etc. In both games there is the possibility to either buy a deed beforehand or use a tool to claim your plot. However, in Wurm you will receive a blessed settlement deed in your inventory from which you can instantly manage your deed and permissions instead of having to be next to the sign. In both games, the price of claiming a plot or founding a deed depend on the size, and both can be bought with in-game cash. The difference, however, is that UO has a selection of set sizes to choose from, whereas Wurm allows you to fully decide the dimensions of your deed as long as length does not exceed the width by more than 4 times and vice versa. In both cases, the size of the plot/deed can be changed at any time, however, they differ in regards to how that is done. In UO, the current house foundation is demolished, giving 1 hour's time to rebuild a new foundation. In Wurm, since it's an area of land you own instead, resizing does not affect houses or anything else within that area, other than becoming vulnerable to decay or destruction if you resize to a smaller size than originally. In UO, your house is safe and sound as long as you have an active subscription, but you don't need to pay any in-game upkeep. In Wurm, you are not required to have a subscription. However, there is an upkeep fee which scales according to how large your deed is. The deed has a coffer into which you can put a lot of money to ensure that the deed is safe for a very long time, or alternately, you can put just enough to keep it going for now. For those wanting to play the game without any fees, there is the option to not own land, but instead build houses on wild land. This is not a very secure option, however, as such houses will need to be regularly fixed and maintained as not to decay. In UO, since what you're doing is actually laying down a foundation, and since land cannot be terraformed, the trees cannot be chopped down, to claim a plot you would need to find a flat and grassy opening to build. In Wurm, however, any land mass can be terraformed to be flat if you have sufficient skills, making it possible to build your house anywhere, even inside tunnels. Back in the day, you could have 1 house per server per account in UO, but these days it is only 1 house per account, spanning all servers. In Wurm, however, it's like UO in the old days, so you can have 1 deed per server per account. Since in UO the plot is designed mainly to build a single house, that means to truly build a genuine village or city, you would have to have many accounts paying subscriptions and have the luck of finding nearby spaces for plots all within the same area. In Wurm, since it's more about deeding an area of land, it's up to you just how many houses you build within that area. So you are fully able to own 1 deed with 1 account, but still build a whole town or city in which you can have friends, guildmates, or villagers live. It's truly amazing. In UO, there's a limited amount of storage space, and building multiple chests and crates does not affect this limit. In Wurm, however, there is no such limit. You can have hundreds of thousands of items. The only thing stopping you is probably just the amount of lag it would cause due to the many crates and chests you'd have laying around. In UO, if you own a customizable plot, you can redesign and customize your house at any time. Each change will either cost you or give you a refund depending on whether you make things larger or smaller. In Wurm, resizing a deed also costs or refunds the coffer money, and it's super easy to do. However, resizing and customizing the houses within that deed is hard work, as you would have to get the raw materials and spend hours, even days, rebuilding. The good thing is that other than that, it costs absolutely nothing. In UO, there are certain objects you can dye. However, you cannot dye house walls. In Wurm, you can also dye some items, but in addition, you can also dye house walls and fences, just not rooftops. In both games, you can freely place items on the floor wherever you like, unlike games like Star Wars: The Old Republic, where you are restricted in this respect. However, since UO is isometric and tile-based, this means items snap to certain coordinate locations within a tile. Some items cannot be rotated at all, whilst some flip left or right and some rotate in 4 different directions. In Wurm, however, items may be placed and rotated freely. The nice thing about UO is that it allows you to stack items on top of one another, for instance, placing a plate upon a table or a crate onto another crate. In Wurm, however, there is no support for this, so you would never be able to set a table with dishes, for instance. This is the one thing I really wish they would solve. In UO, items set down on the ground will decay or will be stolen unless they are locked down within a house. The house itself, however, does not decay unless the player's subscription ends. Similarly, in Wurm, houses within a deeded area do not decay either, but unlike UO, you are safe to set any items on the ground within a deeded area without the danger of someone picking them up. However, Wurm has a decay mechanic built into all items. Some items don't decay at all, some decay slowly, some quickly, depending on different factors. So even if your stuff is on the deed, you will still have to repair things once in a while. The one exception being when your deed's coffer has under 1 month's upkeep, then everything on the deed will start to decay, but very minimally. Again, it's not a problem as you can just repair stuff after filling it again. In UO, you can set permissions for other players, giving them limited possibilities, like being able to lock and unlock items, managing visitors, etc. However, they cannot demolish or customize the house. In Wurm, you can set permissions also, but this includes the possibility for people living on your deed to be able to build and customize their own house. Thus, one of the more popular ways to play the game is to build thriving villages and cities. Both games allow selling or trading of your house, plot, deed in a secure way through the trading window. If payments are not taken care of, in both games houses will start to decay and will eventually collapse, dropping all furnishings, chests, etc. on the ground for others to loot. So if you Edok hunters out there thought UO was the only game you could hunt houses in danger of collapsing, think again. In Wurm it's actually super fun too, as you can sail around with a ship with a big hold, spying on decaying houses along the shorelines with your spyglass. So as we can see, housing works in similar ways and are certainly more closely related than to any other MMO I know. There are still some differences though. For the Ultima player considering Wurm, you would love the space, the freedom to build a whole town with one account, and the ability to have animals, forests, lakes, etc. on your land. But what you would dearly miss is the cute charm of UO and the decorative side, especially being able to stack items on top of one another, like putting a book on a table. Wurm is very charming as well, but in a different way. Now let's look at what was meant to be the main purpose of this video originally, to see how successfully one would be able to recreate classic UO houses in Wurm. We'll go through all of the classic houses one by one in order of size. Starting with small houses. These were a bit tricky to get just right, as the division of tiles per meter is different in Wurm than it is in UO. Using a square meter as an example, in Wurm one tile would fill the entire square meter, whereas in UO that same meter would be divided by, say, 2 times 2 tiles. This allows you to get much more exact results in UO, whereas in Wurm you have to settle for the closest of two extremes. So in the case of these small houses, the 1 times 1 tile house is a bit too small, and yet the 2 times 2 tile house is a bit too big. Had those tiles been divided, the right size would have probably been around 1.5 tiles. For the sake of this experiment, I decided to build both a smaller and larger version of all of the smaller UO houses, but actually, comparing house floor plan size to the size of the map, technically the 2 times 2 tiled houses are closer to the correct size. They just don't look as cozy and cute in Wurm as they do in UO. As you will see when we get into the larger houses, this tile size issue is not a problem so much anymore. Trying to decide which one looks more right from the inside is a bit challenging when the house is empty, as there aren't any pieces of furniture to compare it to, so I've furnished a 2 times 2 tiled house on the island of Oklo. It's actually on the spot of the old Big Mama's shop. Let's have a look. So what do you think? Is the 2 times 2 tiled size a better match to the small UO houses? Now let's look through each of the classic houses one by one. Wood and plaster house. Field stone house. Small brick house. Wooden house. Thatched roof cottage. Small stone workshop. Small marble workshop. I have to say that the small towers match the UO towers so much better on the outside, but then they're very tiny on the inside. They sure are cute though. Small stone tower. Sandstone house with patio. I felt that the original texture color was a bit drab and dark, and didn't really match the warmth of the UO sandstone, so once again I went digging into the files and brightened the texture up a bit. Two-story villa. Two-story log cabin. Out of all of the models, the biggest fail by far was the two-story log cabin. In Wurm, there is no log wall type yet, although people have been wishing for it for a long time. So for now, I had to go with the wooden walls, which I dyed brown. But as you can see, it's pretty darned ugly. Wurm does, however, have palisade fences, so when I get around to building orc villages which usually have those, I'll be okay. Large house with patio. Marble house with patio. The marble house with patio was another model that would have really needed some sort of low fence to line the patio with. Using the marble fence would have been too high, so I opted for the chain fence as the best substitute. Two-story wood and plaster house. Brick house. Tower. Moving on to the three largest and most prestigious buildings, starting with the large tower. Thanks to the recent Wurm additions of left and right arched wall pieces, I was able to roughly simulate the two upper wings. This house model was definitely one of the more popular ones with rich UO players, not so much because of looks, but because of practicality, due to being so high with so many floors and so much storage space, yet having a rather small floor plan, width and lengthwise, so it was much easier to find space to place one on than a keep or a castle. Small stone keep. Back in my UO days, I often fantasized about owning a keep someday, as it had the prestige of a castle, but was much more cozy and compact. However, the floor plan was very impractical, as the four lower corners of the building could only be accessed through 4 different staircases, lacking the connecting hallways one had in the castle. I think I'd have grown quite frustrated with it in the end. Castle. The Ultima Online Castle. With only about 20 castle spots per facet of the main map, and with the largest floor plan, highest amount of storage space, and most definitely highest price, the castle is the epitome of luxury and prestige. To get a castle someday has been many a player's dream and goal. That over there, by the way, is Vesper, which we saw in the last episode. Let's first have a look at how it looks empty, then I will fully furnish it and we will have a new tour. Even though I lived in castles for the majority of my UO time, I was never much a fan of the look of it, to be honest. Having stone walls with stone floors made it a cold, dingy and depressing looking place. It certainly lacked the coziness and warmth of, say, the two-story villa. But due to its sheer size and storage space, it certainly gave all the freedom to create pretty much any type of player establishment one wanted. I still called it home, so this was the one model I was most excited to try to build. My favorite of the two castles I had was most definitely the Vesper one, so I decided to rebuild it on exactly the same spot as I had it in UO. And now for the furnished version. way, if you're a Wurm player who has problems with the corners of the walls not meeting up, or if the corners flicker as they overlap, simply use a mallet to rotate the wall and that should fix things. A small lounge area with a cozy fireplace and bear rug. Although this type of upper stone wall part is not part of the actual UO castle, I added one anyhow as I wanted to make a nice bar section on the ground level. These new T-walls are great for creating pillars like this. The dining room. And after dinner, one can retire to a plush Magincian throne in front of the fireplace to enjoy some brandy. The castle library. Unfortunately, in Wurm you cannot write into or read books like you can in UO, but at least you can write letters on parchment. The southeastern corner, where I've built a warrior's bedroom, keeping the style rather simple and humble. The southwestern corner, where we have the master bedroom. The northwestern corner. And finally, the northeastern corner with another bedroom. Although UO doesn't have a lavatory in this spot, I decided to add some walls and make one anyhow. Whilst items can be given names in Wurm, they are usually additional names on top of whatever the original item name was. But in Wurm Unlimited and in God mode, you can change the original item name as well, which I have done for these items. Like the wash basin, I've renamed to a chamber pot, and the marble planter I've renamed to wash basin, etc. Moving on, let's check the floor level. Every castle surely needs a wine cellar. A little smithing area in the southwestern corner. And here is where the kitchen staff would do their cooking. Also a room for tailoring, as well as a pottery room. All in all, I have to say I'm extremely pleased with how the castle turned out. To me at least, I can definitely recognize it as the UO castle, and although it has that same stony and cold essence as can be seen, upon furnishing the place it actually becomes quite luxurious and inviting. Those reskinned carpets certainly helped as well. Originally the large carpet looks like this, but I reskinned it so I could have a carpet that could be used in long hallways. We also saw this carpet being used in the Vesper Museum in the previous video. It sure would be nice if Wurm made a fourth carpet type that could be tiled to appear long like this one. If you're interested in visiting this castle, rest assured it's here to stay and will be here once the server goes public. Lastly, let's have a look at an example of a customized house. Earlier we saw the fire eisel house I had built on Siege Perilous. Well, I was very fond of that house, so I decided to try to rebuild it here in Wurm in the same location. Starting with the ground level, here is how the small patios and stables turned out. The second floor kitchen and living room, the tailoring room, the master bedroom on the upper floor, I know this has been a very long video, but I hope you've enjoyed taking this journey of player housing with me. Putting this video together has been a beast of a task, but it sure has taken me down memory lane in the best of ways and really juiced me up with that feeling of Ultima Nostalgia. In the next part, we're going to sail the seas over to one of the islands, namely Aucklo. See you there!